Well, hi, I'm Sean in St. Louis, and this is the Marketing Gateway. And today we're going to have part two of our interview with Ed Lahue, a good friend of mine, colleague, former client, and just someone who I really admire for his willingness to share his knowledge and expertise with others. And he's had some hard-won, hard-fought lessons that he has had to share over time in the different types of work that he's done, whether it's consumer packaged goods, whether it's consulting, whether it's healthcare, whether it's counseling small businesses and tech startups, or counseling scientists who are trying to bring a product to market. And he's done all of that and more, and he's going to share a lot of that insight in this second part of the interview. Enjoy. Well, let's go back to talking about SSM Health for a little bit, because again, this is where I know you best, because this is where we work together. But you know, one of the things that I remember about you is you were very different from most of the other people that worked in that system, because you had a lot of really practical, hands-on experience in marketing, but also the world of CPG, consumer packaged goods, as opposed to healthcare. A lot of them had a healthcare background. And so you had to really bring a different skill set into that department, into that team, and some different perspectives to help to try to grow and enhance the brand. So tell me a little bit about how you use some of those CPG skills in healthcare marketing.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was, and that really even started in that large physician group, but very much so happened at Ascension, and then SSM was really teaching this idea of a strategy, and that what's your objective, right? And so I still remember my first marketing director always talked about strategy of, his objective, strategy, action, or sometimes we call them tactics, and those have to be aligned with resources. So in healthcare, typically what would happen is someone says, well, this doctor or this service line VP wants to do X, okay, whatever X is, fill in the blank. And I'm saying, that's interesting, but why do we want to do X? What's the goal of X? And I have this conversation with them and find out, well, the objective is actually something else. And that tactic is not going to fulfill the objective. And after I explain it to them, they go, oh, I see this now. So I had a lot of conversations. Now, you have to do it very tactfully. So you can't go in there and say, I'm not going to do that, right? Instead, you say, you know what? That's one viable tactic. We can do that. But let's talk more about what are you trying to accomplish with that? Now, sometimes it frankly was, I'll have to admit, there's a few ads that we ran because some doctor wanted his picture in the paper. Okay. But I really try to minimize those. Those were minimized. Same thing with events. The same thing with, in healthcare, lots of healthcare events, because somebody says, well, the other hospital, they go to this big event at the Chase Park Plaza or wherever, right? And I'm like, hey, that's great. How can we measure that? Let's at least measure that. So that was the other key thing. So if you have these objective, strategy, action, how do I know I'm meeting the objective if I'm not measuring it, right? Because, the rule of thumb of marketing is always, half of it I can measure, the other half I have no idea where the money's going, but at least I can measure. If I can measure some of it, I at least have some idea that, am I actually gaining new patients? If that's my objective, right? If my objective is just to simply promote to my current patients and get them to use all of our services, that's fine. That's another objective. But I have to measure that, right? So that's where the digital marketing comes into play. Unfortunately, the regulatory bodies have now augmented that. So some of that is getting harder to do, as you may have heard about. I just learned that actually a couple months ago, since I've been out of healthcare. But my point is, if it's not measurable, I'm really going to limit that activity. I still may do some for hey, we feel like if we're not there, it could impact, let's say it's a business development effort, right? So if we don't support, the opposite of that is like EMS, emergency medicine, whatever EMS wanted, I gave them, because I could have one ambulance come to my hospital and literally pay for the entire marketing plan for that program. So we offered, we gave them hats, we gave them, little tchotchkes. We bought scissors that they cut your clothes off of. If the ambulance comes to you and you're having something going on, they're just going to cut your clothes right off. Well, we actually branded those scissors, right? So I'll give them as many scissors as they want, because I want that business. I want, it's a wholesale. Think of it like a wholesaler, So the CPG really, it wasn't so much, a lot of people thought I was going to bring this like glorious branding and how to messaging and all that. And we did some of that. But really what I think what CPG was all about being very strategic and being deliberate, being disciplined, to say that if that's really your strategy, then you got to use that as a filter, and your budget should tie to that strategy. So if I've got something on the budget line that doesn't meet the strategy, there's got to be a discussion about that. So the yellow pages was one. I actually, my first ascension, they were spending $100,000 on yellow pages. My goal was to get that to zero. I was pretty close, because it didn't meet an objective, right? The objective was the doctor wanted their name. The surgeons, believe it or not, we had surgeons that wanted them to be listed under surgery. And I was like, how many people, I showed them the data. How many people actually go use the yellow pages for surgery? It was, I think, 1 out of 1 million. Like it's very, very few. Now back in, before the internet, there was why I wanted to have you in the white pages, so that if someone referred you, you could look up that doctor's name, right? There was some benefit to that. So understanding that customer experience and what we call it in the healthcare world, we call it that patient pathway. Mm-hmm. And now today I work with WashU, and I have scientists that think, well, we've got this great thing and it's going to solve this great problem. And I'm like, hey, from a science standpoint, sounds great to me, but let's find out if anybody cares. And let's find out, what do the doctors think? Because they're the one. Now I'm at the point now where I'm telling people, I don't care if you have strong data that says I can extend human life by 5 years. If Medicare doesn't cover it, doctor doesn't change their protocol to write an order for it, and it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to be a business model. Might be a great idea, but if it can't survive the marketplace, we see that a lot with wellness. Everybody wants to do wellness, but no one wants to pick up the check. No one wants to pay for it. So you have to figure out who's that paying customer, right? And it may not be the user in healthcare. So that's the other thing that was a shocker for me, was people were, like an example, people were doing all these events for seniors to do orthopedic surgery. And I was asking them, well, do you make any money on Medicare? What's your profit margin on a knee replacement for Medicare? And the service manager couldn't tell me. So it turns out we actually break even. So I said, how about we do this? Let's quit the events. Let's do CRM against people who have a high propensity, who are under 65. Let's go after the people that are in their 50s, early 60s. And actually we were very successful. We actually made, I think the margins were pretty decent margins on the commercial payers. So that's the other mix here. The biggest challenge was my frustration though with healthcare, frankly, and why I finally had to retire early was, remember, I was trained on that Bayes model. What's the volumetric model? Well, right. I tried to figure it out for 15 years and I gave up. There is no volumetric model in healthcare. Yeah. And the problem is, it's like a bucket with a bunch of holes in it. So let's use the example of the orthopedic surgeon. Let's say I do a thing for for the commercial payers, I do an event, or I do a CRM, and they finally get to that surgeon, who doesn't work for me, by the way. And the surgeon says, well, what day you want to do the surgery? And they say, oh, I want to do it on a Thursday. Oh, that's great. I go to the other hospital. So all of a sudden I did all this marketing, right? Spent all this money. So the big thing, the discipline that I brought to healthcare was, every dollar that we spend, how much money are we getting back? And if we're not getting a 3-to-1 return, we probably shouldn't be doing it. And I think that's where healthcare was just kind of doing I call it the fairy dust marketing plan, where you do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you hope the best. Or you might, at best, you create things in aggregate. But what I want to know is, this is a business model. If I'm spending money, what am I getting back in return? When I teach business model canvas now, my analogy is, you wouldn't go to the bank and go up to back when we actually went to the bank, went to the teller. You wouldn't give them $1 and they give you 90 cents back. I mean, that's ludicrous, right? You say you're insane, but you'd be surprised how many business models are doing exactly that. where they're putting money into a machine and it's actually bringing back less. Not even getting
You're
one-to-one,
describing the
right?
tech industry, Ed.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and you'll hear these terms if you watch like the Shark Tank. They'll ask them what's your cost of customer acquisition. So if you're only going to sell them one and it costs you more than the margin to sell one, that's not a good deal, right? So that's not a good. Now, if I'm going to sell them three and I break even on the first one and I sell them two more, I'd rather have you do like kind of the inkjet printer model,
Right.
which is like give away the printer. And then I get lots of refills. I sell refills. And we also talk about licensing and things like that, where it's like, yeah, you're not going to make any money on the gizmo, but you actually could create a service model, that says, no, I need a scientist, show up to our lab. And I want to use that scientist's brain for 3 hours. And I can charge, quite a bit for that. But the gizmo that we're selling them is just a break even, maybe. I'm using that as a generic example. So.
Well, it's so interesting what you're talking about with healthcare because, I teach marketing strategy at SIUE now. So your alma mater, and I'm at the graduate level, and we probably because of the textbook we're using, which is written by Philip Kotler and Alexander Chernev and a few other luminaries in the field, but they talk about the G-Stick plan, which is goals, strategies, tactics, implementation, and controls. Yeah. And I know there's various versions of that plan that have been around throughout time.
Yes.
But we're trying to train, at least at business school level, these students to think that way. And the reason why is because they come into the class and they think, oh, we're just going to work on advertising. We're just going to work on writing communications briefs and executing some creative content. And we get to that in like the last week.
Yes.
After we taught them all the other things.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I'm really taking away from our conversation is just the need to approach these things strategically, because you're right. The things that are fun are definitely appealing to those that want to go into the field. But if you don't have an underlying strategy behind it, then it is, as you said, fairy dust, where you're just sprinkling it around and hoping that it's going to turn into something magical. But most often it's not. It's just going to dissipate and vanish, and that's that.
Yeah. Because there's so much noise out there, right? And we used to test this with advertising in the packaged goods. It takes a lot of money. I mean, for that to be really effective, it takes a lot more money. And healthcare doesn't even have they don't have the margins to spend that kind of level. Most of the advertising you see in healthcare today typically is such a low weight in terms of gross rating points. That's why I'm a big fan of digital, where I can get somebody who is really interested in knee replacement, right? Or CRM, database marketing, where I do the direct mail or email marketing, where because one of the things I learned at Bristol Myers Squibb is once you get diagnosed with something or once you become pregnant, all of a sudden I cannot read enough information. But prior to that, I'm like, no. Another great example in healthcare was they wanted me to market trauma. Like I'm going to tell a mom, and I had all this mom experience, right, with marketing to pregnant women, and I did kids, and I did, and so I had this. I still remember it like it's yesterday. I had this person that really wanted us to market trauma, and I said, "That's interesting." I said, "The problem is she's going to say that's the kid down the street that's going to get into an accident with their." So what we did, we actually created a public service announcement. So nothing bad happens, but the possibility of something bad happened was in her mind. So it played to that idea. She could still have her worry ball, right? Remember the worry ball. So how the public service announcement went was the kids are going off to do four-wheeling, and she sees they left their helmets on the counter, and she's imagining them tumbling upside down and all this, right? And we have to show that. So it's kind of dramatic. But then at the end, the kids come back and grab the helmet. And it's just sponsored by St. Mary's. It wasn't, so that was my way of dealing with trauma. I wanted to advertise trauma. I'm like, well, we could really advertise the brand. We're here for you if something bad happens, but it's nothing's going to bad happen to you. But that's not, they didn't understand that. They didn't understand those insights that consumer is like, not going to believe this. It's like, no, it's not me. I'll never get cancer. So don't tell me about cancer until I've been diagnosed. Right. So I'd rather have you, I want the primary care doctor or the oncologist to know about those things so that when you do get diagnosed, Now you're like, oh, I need to understand this, right? It's important for me to understand it. But prior to being diagnosed with cancer, that's probably the extreme example of that. I'm not so general advertising for things like that are just a big waste of money, because it's like, it's kind of the, what's a no, 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 I'm not going to listen. That's really what's happening. But that happens even in general advertising for consumer products. I'm constantly evaluating. I drive my wife crazy. So, we stream almost everything, but even the streaming now has all these ads. And I'm like, you see the same ad like 4 times, right? And I'm going, okay, after the 4th time I saw this, I'm still not getting it. And if I can't get it, and I'm a marketer, there's no way the general public is going to understand this. And then sometimes she might get it. And she was like, oh yeah, well, you didn't see the kid at the beginning. And it's like, whoa, that's way too much of a mental leap, for the average consumer. And
I've been getting one lately where it's for a cold remedy, which those don't ever work. And then there's another one from the ad council about tell your kids about fake pills. So it's like I get both of these all the time, and I'm like, those two things shouldn't even be running together, let alone being shown to me 50 times a day. So
yeah,
I love it. Well, I wanted to, in the time we have left, talk a little bit about your last few years where you have worked in Small Business Development Center consulting with clients, and I know you had hundreds of them.
Yeah.
And then you're also doing something really interesting at Washington University here in St. Louis now. So let's talk a little bit about the Small Business Development Center for a moment. So you took all this knowledge and expertise and experience, and you channeled this into making the last few years of your career helping other people, which I have to say, I admire like you wouldn't believe. That's one of the things that I have always said. Ed Lahue, like he really walks the walk and talks the talk, right?
Yeah.
But you helped people. And I mean, I came to you and you referred us to someone at one point. So tell me a little bit about how you wound up in that, and what are some of the things that you got to do in that space as a small business development counselor?
I was a volunteer over at WashU, and a guy over there knew the state director at the Missouri Small Business Development Center. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a group of universities typically, and some are going to be like your local chamber of commerce or economic development center. And they're most of those organizations are in a cooperative agreement with the Small Business Administration, and part of that is forms the Missouri Small Business Development Center. So every state has one. Most states are usually tied to a university. So in this case, I was actually a part of University of Missouri out of Columbia, even though I was located here in St. Louis. So and so the gentleman that I knew at WashU said, hey, they need a tech counselor. And I'm like, well, I'm not really a tech guy, but I've spent my entire career working on new product development and marketing, hanging out with, I did chemists with laundry detergent, food scientists. Then me, Johnson, it was, we had a lady who was expert in lipids, and all these scientists and engineers. So I always remind my clients, I said, I had 1 year of high school chemistry. So talk slow when it comes to the science side. And frankly, I don't really care about the science or the technology. You're going to figure all that out. I'm going to help you figure out what's the business model. And I think I'm finally convinced it's human nature. Human nature says, I want to go work on the prototype, and I want to go work on product research with the prototype. And you skipped 3 major steps before you get there. Yeah. So a lot of what I taught them was, how do we go out and figure out what we call customer discovery? And we primarily taught business model canvas. There's other ones called lean model canvas, but they all really evolve around the same idea, very similar to how I did new product development. I always ask myself 4 questions. What's the problem we're solving? Who's the customer? How many customers will actually give you cash for this? And I finally quit saying, what's the value proposition? Because I found scientists didn't relate to that, but they could relate to this idea of behavior change. So I would say, how are you solving the problem better that's going to create behavior change? Because that's really the hard part, right? And I also learned things like, I had to teach them all these corporate isms like burning platform. I say, if you're literally standing on a platform and it's on fire, you will have to leap from the platform, right? So what's the burning platform for for that potential customer? Particularly in a B2B scenario. So it could be, I'm going to sell this to this research lab, who's doing some kind of cell research, and I'm going to go out and talk to them. So what keeps them up at night is another way to say it. What is really the problem? And could your early research, could your research, before you start doing prototypes, how could it apply to that problem? In a very broad sense. So hold off doing product development, hold off doing product research until you really define that problem. And we asked them to interview sometimes as many as 100, 200 people before they start even thinking about prototypes. And then even before you do a prototype, I would suggest writing a concept, or maybe if you're doing a digital product like an app, you could do a wireframe that kind of describes, then ask those same people that you did customer discovery. Because in customer discovery, we tell them, I don't want you to talk about your prototype. So we're teaching them really how to do market research on a limited budget. Because they can't afford to hire, a great market research firm like yourself, yet. But so we're teaching them. So I really enjoyed doing that. I did that both one-on-one with about 200 startups. And I also taught classes where we had giving people that introduction. And then for them to really learn it, they had to go out and do the actual work, which was and that will really kind of define the startups pretty quickly. Like, how bad do you really want this startup? Because many of them, I think, like the idea of a startup. Sort of like, I don't know if you've ever been to a restaurant that seemed to turn over all the time. You can't seem to keep the same owner. Well, those restaurants, usually the volumetrics didn't work, right? Like, the restaurant was this really nice, cute place, and they wanted the idea of, they like the idea of decorating, and, we're going to pick out the nice china and the silverware and the tablecloths and all this stuff. But they didn't really like the grind of running a restaurant, right? And actually marketing, getting people in. And they really didn't stop and figure out the volumetrics and say, okay, so if 90% of my business is on Friday night, Saturday night, maybe Sunday afternoon, and I only have 8 tables, each table is on average of 3 people, that's 24 people. If I turn it over 3 times, like, do the math. Like, right. Sometimes it's getting them to do the simple math. When I was a volunteer at the SBDC in Indiana, I used to get a lot of people that wanted to, I'm going to quit my job at Toyota or wherever, some factory job, and they got paid well. I had to remind them, hey, when you're sick, doesn't Toyota still pay you? Well, you ever startup, then you're the business, right? And so I used to have them do the back of the envelope business model, and I'd say, okay, well, let's just use like for retail. I would tell them, let's use traffic flow. So if this many cars, we can actually there's databases that tell me how many cars go by that location. So let's just wild guessing, right? This is just really rough luck. If 10% of them come into your store and you have an average ring of $5, let's say it's a coffee shop or something like that, it could be like that, or if it's an ice cream shop or whatever. Okay. And then just do the math. How much is that per year? Now I want you to calculate what's it going to cost for rent, what's it going to cost for insurance, lights, all the overhead. And guess what? By the time they were done, how much do you make at Toyota? You're making what, $40,000? And this is back, now they make more than
right.
that.
Back when it meant something, right?
And I was like, okay, so if you're highly successful, right, you're one of the 10% that actually make this work, you will break even looks like about year 2, and your take home pay is about $40,000. And that's only 10% of the people that actually are successful.
Right. Yeah.
Retail, like 90% fail. So, really when it comes down to all these jobs I had, even my sales job, right? Sold, I'm still doing volumetric. I'm going into this store and saying, well, yeah, you can handle 50 case display, but this store is a 5 case display, and understanding the customer who's, well, I couldn't sell Armor Chili in Litchfield if my life depended on it. Because guess what's made there? Raised chili, chili man chili. Okay. So why put the effort in that? I'll sell something else, right? So, some of this seems like common sense, but I was shocked when I had a new product that was launched before I got there. And the market research firm did this report. It's about that thick. And in the intro, in the executive summary, in bold letters, it says, we recommend you do not launch this product. But the product was launched anyway. So even big companies do some of these silly things, when they defy Oh no, we'll do it better. We'll do it better than you. Yeah, we don't believe that market research. Like, well, then why did you spend money on it? That used to drive me crazy too. So my point of the story here is all these jobs really come down to, is there a business model? Who's the customer? What's driving that customer? And, what's your objective? And then is it measurable? Can you measure that objective? And are we meeting the objective or not? And if we're not, then we try something else. In healthcare, it was a little bit more like flying the plane while you're building it. So I was fine with that. So I would have certain things going because I know we got to keep doing something. But then while I'm doing that, I'm measuring it. And then I'm going to say, you know what? We did this for a year and we didn't get one customer. And we're going to stop doing that, but at least we knew. But with the fuzzy front end, it's a little bit more like, I always tell my latest analogy, it's kind of like making Jell-O, but you have no container. And so it's literally going all over the counter, onto the floor. And so, but you have to be comfortable with that. So I had to get scientists and engineers, get comfortable with that. But I said, you know what? It's no different than when you're in the lab, right? You're creating a hypothesis in the lab. You're doing science experiments and you're either confirming that hypothesis or you're changing that hypothesis. We're going to do the same thing with customer discovery. So once I kind of explained to that, probably 95% of them bought in and said, yeah, I'm going to go out. Now, had to get them over the fact, the fear of actually going out and talk to people. Because Steve Blank and all these other people always talk about get out of the building, right? And Steve Jobs was quoted saying that too. Got to get out of the building. You can't just live in your own little world. So that was one of the things that I still teach that today with WashU. So
yeah, and one of the things that makes it or breaks a small business is understanding who their customers are, because when you're starting out, when you're in that early phase of the product marketing cycle, you need to know who your early adopters are going to be, who your innovators are going to be, or else you're not going to go any further than that. Yeah. And a lot of times I think especially engineers, because I have some engineers in my family, so I know this world well, but they're so focused on the problem that they think needs to be solved that they don't go and ask anybody if that problem is actually something they're willing to pay to have solved.
Exactly.
You brought up the moms earlier who don't want their worry ball to go all the way down. They want to be able to hold on to some of that worry because they have to. Yeah. That's part of their job. Well, the same is true a lot of times with these needs that we can fill through engineering or through product design. But does anybody want to pay for that? Does anybody actually care enough to put their money on the line? A lot of times the answer is no. And that's why products fail so often. Yeah.
Well, the rule of thumb that we use at Bristol Myers Squibb was we only launched 0.5% of our seed ideas. So we had a stage gate process. So in discovery, 200 seed ideas, only 4 to 5 of those would go early development, 2 would late development, 1 would launch.
Wow.
And so a tech startup is trying to take this one idea and I call that run to the goal line. So instead of a funnel, and I said, don't fall in love. So the theme that I teach in all my small businesses, don't fall in love with your potential solution because it's probably wrong. I said 99.9% of the time it's wrong. You will pivot 3 times minimum. If you're doing it right with the research, you will pivot 3 times because you'll find out, oh, well, that really wasn't the exact problem I thought my hypothesis. I was off by just 1. I mean, sometimes it could just be a little bit, right? But that little bit can make a huge difference. Or like you said, we talked about, I won't pay for the gizmo, but I'll pay for an expert to come in and help me make a difference with the gizmo,
So true.
So that's where the servicing and those other things come into play. So it's really, don't hold on to this. Many of them, that's why, Steve Blank calls it death by demo. So, we don't want to start demoing things. That's what a lot of them want to do. Let me show you my demo. Like, no, I don't really care about the demo because your demo is probably wrong, because you haven't done enough customer discovery to even know what you're working on. We'll have coders that'll spend hours and hours coding. And I'm like, yeah, but what are you coding for? What do what's the problem that you're really solving? And I'm like, well, no, I thought this is this really cool thing. But no, you need to stop. Please stop. It's like, we have many people that want to pursue grants and I'll say, that's great. But even the grants are going to want to know what's your business model. The SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research grants, they're going to want to know that. I had one guy that even said, well, I just need some money for some molds so I can go out and sell some more. I'm like, you might be selling the wrong thing. And he actually was selling the wrong thing. And he was never he'd been doing this for probably 8-9 years, and it's like a hobby. It really is what it turns out to be. So.
Absolutely. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I always enjoy talking to you and learning from you, Ed. And even though we talked about some things that I was familiar with, I'm sure to a lot of our audience, there'll be things that are brand new. And I even learned some things today that I didn't know. So that's fantastic. But one thing I ask every guest to do at the end of our show is plug something, anything you want. So here's your chance. What would you like to plug?
Well, I think it's probably the Missouri Small Business Development Center. If you're in Missouri, and if you're not in Missouri, other states have an equivalent to this. So you got Illinois. In fact, the SIU Edwardsville, they have the Illinois SBDC. Joanne there runs that great center there. So every state has one. But if you're in Missouri, it's taxpayer funded. So most of the services don't cost anything outright. We never say free. I say no cost, taxpayer funded. But I'm always shocked at how very few people know about it. And it's one of those things where, it's hard to have government funding to actually advertise or, like that. So typically it's more of a word of mouth thing. So that's where, I was successful because I partnered a lot with St. Louis University and Washington University, UMSL, also to some degree. And so that's where I got all those referrals from. I created my own referral. So I think that's where, that'd be my plug would be, hey, if you're a small business, either thinking about a small business or if you're an existing small business, because the vast majority of the counselors actually work with existing businesses. So it's not just for, I'm talking a lot about startups because that was the thing I worked on.
Sure.
In fact, I got a little bit bored with existing businesses. So I focused, and there were other people that didn't like the startups because they don't like that fuzzy front end because it's not defined. I'm like, oh, that makes it fun for me. So that's why I was wired that way. So again, I think 90% of the counseling is done by existing businesses. They even have a great program through, I can't remember the Kauffman Foundation funds it, where it's like, if you have at least $1 million in sales, but you're kind of stuck, you're trying to make it to the next level, they offer a whole section just on that. And they bring in other counselors besides the SBDC. I think that program's out of Springfield, but they do a lot of it virtually. So, you can even don't have to go to Springfield necessarily. But yeah, there's a big center at UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, Springfield, Sedalia. There's even smaller regions like up in St. Charles. They have the Economic Development Center. Mm-hmm. And then we have the St. Louis Partnership here in town. Colleen does a great job with them out of Clayton and some other offices. So it's not just University of Missouri is what I'm trying to say. It's these other organizations that partner with the SBA to help small businesses. So they desperately need the help because many of them kind of got into it because maybe there might have been their family's business. And they may not have the formal training. So it's a great way to kind of pick up that, or they even have the formal training, but they just need an outside perspective many times. So that's my plug.
I've been a client of small business development centers before, both when I was trying to do a startup on my own and then later on here at RPG. Yeah. And I have to say, I have nothing but the best things to say about the experience. They really help you to think clearly about your problems, and so grateful to you for all the years you put in doing that at the end of your career. Yeah. So thank you. And I know you're happily in retirement now and doing some occasional teaching, but you've been such a wonderful resource and the entire time I've known you, but also today here as one of our marketing mentors in the Marketing Gateway. So thank you so much for being here. Sure. And we'll have you back sometime, I'm sure, but thanks for being on today.
All right. Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, once again, I want to thank Ed Lahue for coming on the Marketing Gateway and being a marketing mentor to us all. It is just so exciting and so rewarding to hear that one of the members of our local marketing community has been able to do so much, that he came from the same origins that I came from at SIUE and was able to have such an incredible career and so much impact on the world, not just as a marketer, but also as someone who's really out there helping other people to think about their business and their strategy so that they can be successful too. So I'm so grateful to him. Thank you so much for being on, Ed. And I just want to mention the reason that we do these interviews, and we're going to keep doing them, we're going to have even more of them coming in the next year, is because we want to learn from each other. We have this great marketing community here in St. Louis of people who know their stuff and who are practicing marketing every day. And I'm so excited to help introduce you to members of this community, to bring us together and to learn from one another. So thank you so much for listening. I'm Sean in St. Louis. This has been the Marketing Gateway. See you next time.